All right, welcome back, John Connor. Thank you so much for joining me again.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me again, Mel. I really appreciate it. It's an honor to be back here with my friend, and I'm really looking forward to an even stranger subject matter than the last time. So,
Yeah,
thank
me too. Yeah, I'm super excited to continue this conversation. Last time we were talking about the demonic nature of, what people with schizophrenia are dealing with. And today we're going to try to tie it into the whole UFO alien phenomena. So, but during the premiere of part one, someone in the chat was asking about sleep paralysis. And I actually have a super interesting, crazy story about that. But what do you make of sleep paralysis, and have you experienced it? And do you think it's demonic?
I've well, yeah, it's definitely. I mean, like I've talked about this with my spiritual father. There's been a couple times when there's been once or twice it's happened to me. It's by no means though like how other people have, because I've heard people about where they see the shadow guys and they they feel like someone's on top of them or punching them or whatever, creepy, long fingered, all that stuff. I've heard all that stuff, and thank God none of that has happened to me. But yeah, it's 100% demonic. There's no there's no way. There's no way it isn't. So, but what's your story? What happened
All
with you?
right, this is really crazy. Okay, so basically, so I grew up in the Bay Area, right? And my parents got a divorce when I was a kid, and my mom moved just outside of the Bay Area, like not far, but the culture was very different. And at the time, I was going to move to a new school, with my mom, and like it was a whole culture shock. And then I was becoming a teenager, so I like hated myself, and there was all kinds of you know aberrations of the soul right, for me in my personal life at the time. And it was in the middle of the school year, so I just kind of dropped in on the scene right at this school. And I arrived on a Monday. When I arrived, nobody quite told me where I was supposed to be or anything. So I went to the front office, right, to find out like where I'm supposed to go. And so I was sitting there, and I noticed like all these girls were like crying their eyes out. And like more girls were coming in and just crying and like group hugging. And the vibe was just so weird, and no one explained to me what was going on. I don't even remember like who told me, who, finally told me what was happening. But basically, I arrived that Monday, right? The
Yeah.
Friday previous, a girl unalived herself in the bathroom at that school.
Ooh,
And
Lord.
I felt like I was just coming in, like, and I was just like this imposter. It
Oh
was
yeah.
so bizarre. It was crazy. And then, so a couple weeks later, right, after lunch, I went to my math class, my geometry class, and I was like sick from whatever I ate, right? So I excused myself to go to the restroom. And I was there for like a long time, like I was like, sick, right? And
Hmm.
so I went back to my class, and my teacher just looked like as white as a ghost. Like she was just petrified. And the whole vibe was weird in the class. Like everyone was just like freaked out a little bit, right? And she was like, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. It's just that and this is the first time like she told me this, and she told me this in front of everyone in my class. She was like, it was this class that the girl, so and so excused herself during this period after lunch, and did what she did in the bathroom.
Oh.
Yeah, dude, I'm getting chills, just thinking about it. And shortly after that, I started having really bad like sleep problems, like sleep paralysis, like everything you mentioned. I looked on the internet about it, and yeah, it's like either like a dark presence is in the room, or like, you feel pressure on your chest or something. And it happens like when you're sleeping and then you're about to wake up, like that state when you're like kind of half awake, half asleep is
Yes.
usually when it happens. And most people are just like doing their best to like move or like scream so someone will come and wake them up. That's
Yeah.
how terrifying it is. But for me, and I didn't really see many accounts on the internet like this, but what I experienced was it was like this like big black ball of crackly static, and it would just be like whirring around in my room. And every time it would make a cycle, it would go through my brain. Okay, and it felt like a seizure, what I would imagine a seizure would feel like. It would
Did
be
it
like,
feel like someone was like put a plug into your brain and like there was like an electrical like sort of like circuit going off? Like someone had like plugged in like someone like put a taser to the back of your head and it was like zapping the back of your
yes,
brain.
yes,
Is
but
that what it felt like?
it always aligned with this like ball that I was envisioning, like in the room, going through
That's
my
so
head,
weird.
right?
That's
It was
so
so crazy. Yeah, I remember chatting with my friends about it, like on AOL, And at
oh
the
yeah,
time, my mom was watching The Lethal Weapon, and with Mel Gibson, I think, right? And
face
that's
mouth.
when I had to give it a name. Yeah, I had to give it a name, so I called it the Lethal Weapon feeling. So I'll never forget that. And
I like that.
it's a pretty cool name. But yeah, shortly after that, okay, I don't want to give too much information because it was actually like on the news and stuff. But I had a life-threatening medical emergency, and it actually had something to do with my brain. And by the grace of God, I didn't die that night.
Wow, wow, wow.
And so
What
I
a
can't help
system.
but see all these things like being related. Maybe they're
Yeah.
not, but I can't help but see that. And I also suffered from more of this kind of like sleep disorder stuff for a while. But I think ever since I, came into the church, I really haven't had an issue.
Well,
Thank
thank
God.
God for that, dude. I mean, like, wow, that's great. It's the reason why I also brought up that specific, like the taser thing is because like that same feeling used to happen to me, like from like when I was,
Really?
yeah, from what thing is though is the thing though. I didn't like envision like is the thing. I didn't have like an image in my head of like this thing in my room. It was literally like I honestly like I don't know why I did it. I was like 13 or 14 at the time, but it kind of induced the feeling because it felt like an electrical zap was going through, but it was almost like there was like a control valve in my brain that I was trying to open up to make the
Oh my
feeling
God.
like keep going further and further because it was like there was like something. It was almost like, I don't know how I did it. I don't know what I did to make it happen, but it was like this electrical charge was going through my brain, especially because like at that point in time I was starting to take it was one of the points where there were several points where it's like I started or was reintroduced to like different like psychomotor stimulants because I used to take like Ritalin and all that other stuff. So it's like at a certain point I would start taking it and my sleep would be awful. I'd just be up all night. I would just be laying in bed just like waiting to go to sleep because I was like methed out, because all
Damn.
those drugs are like amphetamines, so they just make you
Yeah.
stay up all night. So I'd be up it'd be like 2 a.m. I'd be awake and I'd be in my bed and I'd be like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I'm just awake, but if I get up and play a video game or if I play Nintendo or something, I'm gonna be up all night. But maybe if I just stay here, I'll just go to sleep. And so then I would sort of like envision like almost like a valve or something I wouldn't envision it every single time, but I would sort of figure out it's almost like there was like this background noise I was tuning into in my brain. And I was trying to tune into it. And the more I tuned into it, the louder it got. But the louder the sound got, the more it sounded um, like an electrical wave. And it felt like there was an electrical wave, like a pulse going through my brain basically. So that's why I brought that up
Wow.
because it was like, yeah, it sounds very similar to what I was feeling as well. So I don't know. Maybe I,
Interesting.
maybe I had a close call. Maybe I should have gone to the hospital at
Well,
some point
oh
myself.
my
Dude, I don't know.
gosh, yeah. But actually, we're gonna talk about the opening of the senses. But before I do, there was another detail in the Jerry Marzinski book that I forgot to mention last time. And it was actually like this was right when Jerry was just kind of figuring out that this was something else, not just hallucinations that these people were hearing. And this
This when he
one
was working as an Iceman still.
what?
No, that's a joke because Jerry
Oh,
worked
Jerry,
because
yeah,
because
Jerry.
our friend Jerry works as an Iceman.
Yeah,
I'm
we could just
sorry.
pretend it's Jerry.
Yeah, exactly.
So basically, this was like the one incident that really got him spooked and really got him thinking about this stuff. And he said that he had a patient whose voices, these were like very angry voices, okay? This guy had like super angry demons. And he had the patient in his office, and he just felt like the walls were just like charged with energy and like electricity. And then he heard like this loud crackle sound like whirring through the room, and then it ended up in his trash can. And then he looked in the trash can and he saw nothing there. And he was too scared to like bring anything up to the patient or anything. But it's it very much sounds like, you know, my lethal weapon feeling. And it kind of harkens back to all the stuff you were saying about, you know, Twin Peaks and, you know,
the electricity. Yeah, that they move, that demons move through electricity. Well, not they move through thin air, and they said that they were, yeah, they came from thin air. Actually, he talked about that in the interview that I watched of him, right? And so there's actually a follow-up to that. So he didn't say anything about it to the client, but the next week he saw him a week later, and he's just like, hey, listen, like, remember how last week I acted all funny? Well, I heard this noise. Did you hear it? He's like, oh yeah, I heard it too. He's like, honestly, I didn't say anything because you know, I thought, I didn't realize you could see it either. I didn't realize you heard it either. And then he was like, well, what was that one of them? Was that the voice? He's like, yeah, that was the voice. And the voice was trying to scare you off. And it was also telling me stuff at the same time. He's like, what was it telling you? And the patient said, well, it was telling me basically to find an ice pick and to put it through your face and kill you. And Jerry says to him, well, why didn't you do it? And the patient says, well, I didn't have one and no one gave it to me. Otherwise I would have done it.
Wow. That's so scary, man.
Yeah. Just a little. Yeah. Just
so malevolent. Malevolent,
man. 100%. 100%. Yeah. So.
Well, one question that was kind of left unexplored, I guess, in part one is how the barriers are kind of broken, right, inside of a person to be able to commune with, you know, these spirits, whether voluntary or involuntary, right, or just completely unsuspecting. You know, some saints call it the doors of perception. Some saints call it the gates of the senses. And, you know, we talked about how demonic attacks can happen to holy people, right? Like you talked about St. Paisios. And there's the famous example of St. Anthony the Great, whose feast day is actually this Friday. So
may he pray for us.
Yeah, may he pray for us. And it's kind of providential, that actually. And what's that?
I said, no, I just said 100%. It's very providential.
It is, yeah. And obviously even more famous than him is the example of Christ himself in the desert, right?
Absolutely.
And we know that when people set their course on God, these demonic attacks happen, like catechumens and people who are recently baptized. And you gave the example of the bang on the door of your friend who is, you know, about to get sacramentally married, right, in the church. So, yeah. In all these cases, though, it seems like, you know, these people more or less have the proper framework for understanding these things. But on the flip side, people can open up these doors of perception within themselves, and it's truly the gates of hell. You could do like crazy drugs, right? Like we talked about the meth psychosis. You could do psychedelic drugs where you get in contact with machine elves or whatever they're called.
Right. Well, ego death, right? That's the whole phenomenon of ego death, where people like, you know, which by the way, also, I don't know about you, but every single person I know that has like said that they've had an ego death, like their ego actually got like bigger after the fact. So I don't know how that works, but like I'm just saying it's a little bit of a misleading name.
Very delusional, these people.
100%, yeah. 100%.
Yeah. Yeah, and then there's also, you know, occult practices. There's witchcraft, seances. I've heard of crazy stories about Ouija boards, right? Tarot.
Oh yeah. Well, and you know, I think at some point, I think Elder Thaddeus, when we were talking about that at the last point, mentioned that personal beliefs are a way in which these sort of barriers can be broken. I think he mentioned that at some point. Do you remember that?
Yeah, and I'm gonna read about it a little bit too from The Soul After Death.
Oh, you are? Okay, perfect. All right. I was just gonna say that's I don't know if I mentioned it to a great extent, but that's these sorts of practices how beliefs end up breaking these barriers, because they are like, your beliefs in those occult practices are what's going to make you practice them, and then that is what will in turn make you, go and do these things. So
like it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Yeah, I was also going to mention that, even like wishfully peering into the sky for some signs of UFOs or something will actually accomplish that. And we're going to
100%.
see.
Yeah, it's tilting this, because all it is, it's just a tilting the soul away from the proper orientation.
Yeah.
It's like what I said about the whole radio receiver. It's like if you it's one thing if by accident or by chance or whatever your receptor gets messed up and then you can't hear, you get put to the wrong station and then you're receiving demonic things. It's another thing altogether if you are just like, oh, I wonder what if I turn the knob all the way to this way, where's it going to lead me? Well, then you're just you're opening the door up yourself at that point.
Yeah, it reminds me of what you were just talking about yourself.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Right. 100%.
Yeah, only God knows why, these things happen. And we're going to see by his great grace and mercy and love for us, he actually tries to keep them closed for the most part. So St. John Cassian, is it Cassian or Cassian?
I think it's, I honestly don't know. I've always pronounced it Cassian.
Cassian. Okay.
Yeah, but I don't know. I honestly don't know, though. It could be Cassian for all I know. So
that's okay. Well, St. John, he's the 5th century father of Gaul who first transmitted the full teaching of Eastern monasticism in the West. He writes, such a multitude of evil spirits fills the air, which is spread out between heaven and earth, and in which they fly in disturbance and not idly, that the divine providence, for our benefit, has hidden and removed them from the gaze of men. Otherwise, from fear of their attack, or of the frightful spectacle of the faces into which they are transformed and changed by their own will, whenever they wish, men would be struck with unbearable terror and ready for collapse. So he's saying that God actually blinds us from the spiritual reality of these demons because it's just too terrible for us.
100%. And I mean, think about the times we mentioned this on the last show about how when an angel is encountered, and the almost ubiquitous reaction to them is horror, and those are the good guys, right?
Yeah.
So I don't even want to imagine what seeing the true form of one of the fallen ones is, because I'm all set. I'm good. I'm all set. Yeah.
I don't want to see them.
Yeah. I mean, even glimpses into it, like the art that comes forward, in the post-Renaissance period, like just look at Hieronymus Bosch and that's only scratching the surface, but that is horrifying. Yeah. It's completely horrifying. So yeah, I'm all set. So
and as we're going to see, actually, I think Father Seraphim is the one quoted there, but he talks about how when evil spirits try to look like angels, they just look like bright angels instead of, what they would really look like. But okay, so it says, from places quoted in sacred scripture, it is clear that the bodily organs serve as it were, as doors and gates into the inner chamber where the soul is, and that these gates are opened and closed at the command of God. Most wisely and mercifully, these gates remain constantly closed in fallen men, lest our sworn enemies, the fallen spirits, burst in upon us and bring about our perdition. And this kind of made me think about, that chapter that I read at the end of our last conversation, and how, you could say that, communion with the evil spirits is a part of our fallenness, but it's actually the cause of our fallenness, and it literally is our fallenness, you know? And I could be wrong about that, but it just seems kind of obvious to me.
Well, it's entering. It's we have to have the option to. You know what I mean? In some sense, it's like we not necessarily have to have the option to, but we have to be able to choose between good and evil at some point. There has to be a choice. You know.
Yes.
But at the same time, it's also like we're the ones. If we us letting them in is the thing that causes the fallenness. Also, it's the
Yes.
you know the fall didn't happen when the serpent showed up. Adam and Eve had to have agreed to what the serpent was giving them
Right.
in order for the fall to have taken place. You know.
Yeah, definitely. So this measure is all the more essential in that we, after the fall, find ourselves in the realm of fallen spirits, surrounded by them, enslaved by them. Having no possibility to break in on us, they make themselves known to us from outside, causing various sinful thoughts and fantasies, and by them enticing the credulous soul into communion with them. It is not permitted for a man to remove the supervision of God, and by his own means, by God's allowance, but not by his will, to open his own senses and enter into visible communion with spirits. But this does happen. It is obvious that by one's own means, one can attain communion with the fallen spirits. What attracts men into entering into open communion with spirits? Those who are light minded and ignorant of Christianity in action are attracted by curiosity, and that's going to be a big point about these UFOs, by ignorance, by unbelief, without understanding that by entering into such communion, they can cause themselves the greatest harm. And he says, in our time, many allow themselves to enter into communion with fallen spirits by means of magnetism, spiritism, in which the fallen spirits usually appear in the form of bright angels and deceive and delude by means of various interesting tales, mixing together truth with falsehood. They always cause an extreme disorder to the soul and even to the mind. Those who see spirits, even holy angels, sensuously should not have any, by any mediumistic talent which can be inherited, fancies about themselves. This perception alone in itself is no testimony whatever of the merit of the perceivers. Not only depraved men are capable of this, but even irrational animals. So he's saying, like, don't take any pride in being able to see spirits.
Yes, and that's almost ubiquitous amongst the experience of the saints. Also, any of them that can, they, Father Seraphim talks about that in this work and in Orthodoxy and the Religion of the Future, that is, and in Orthodox Survival Course. It's like even like if you look at Saint Seraphim, for example, it's like what he saw. It's like he didn't really say it until God basically told him to say it to people, and then it was like he waited until his student, he waited for his student. I forgot his name, but whoever his student was, he waited for him to show up in his life, basically for him to start telling these stories to people. And so, it's part of the reason why it takes many, many, many years of spiritual struggle before those sorts of things are even able to be, cultivated in a person. And it's a very select few. And a truly spiritual person is not one that asks for these sorts of things. And, it's sort of, in some ways, it's the mark of a true Christian to not seek these sorts of things out. I guess God really just waits to give it to the people who want it the least, I suppose. And after many years of struggle, because it's not something that is needful for us. It's usually needful for us to not engage in these visions.
Yeah.
Do you now? I mean, obviously, you, Mel, you've you were not always a Christian, as neither was myself. I've had interactions with people that are. It's odd because honestly, especially in the last year, it's mostly come from people that are actually my coworkers. And I don't know if this is the same with you, but it's like if you had interactions with people that are like not Christians that basically say like, oh, well, I've had this and this experience. And it's like, I started going to a tarot reader. I started doing this, that, and the other. You've had those experiences. Yeah. And does it ever seem when you are interacting with those people, when they talk about it, that they're like almost going crazy when they talk about it? Does it almost sound like schizophrenic rambling when they start?
I have a very close example of this. Yes.
Yeah. Yes.
Oh my gosh.
There's so oddly enough, it's I've had people that work with, with some of my patients, they're team members, and I don't dislike these people by any chance. I actually, get along with them very well. I think they're really good. They're good people, and I think in a lot of ways they have a really good head on their shoulders. But there's one particular time where, and this was recent too. This one lady starts telling me, almost out of nowhere too. She was just like telling me about how she's been watching a bunch of TikToks right after that guy from was it one? I almost called it One Piece, but the guy from One Direction, not the guy from One Piece, the guy from One Direction died recently.
Maybe, yeah.
Yeah, whatever his name is, he passed away, and then she was telling me how she's just been on a TikTok binge about how there's these theories about how he died, and she just started telling me like in a very and she almost got emotional about it. She's like, I think they killed him. I was like, oh, well, I didn't realize you were a fan. She's like, I actually don't listen to One Direction at all. And I was like, well, then what are you getting emotional about, ma'am? I don't understand. Like, where is all this emotion coming from? She's like, well, I've been watching tarot card readings about his death. And I was like, I see. I was like, well, ma'am, you might want to, I was like, you might want to just sort of hang back with those. It's like, you never know where that sort of stuff, where people get that information from. It could just be, sensationalist and everything else. Because I don't know, I didn't really know where she was at in her head 100%. And there's been other times where people have told me the same thing. Actually, another coworker basically told me that she went to a medium, and the medium was telling her things that our client, one of my schizophrenic clients, always says to us. She's like, does this mean anything to you? And basically repeating whatever he was hearing in his delusions, essentially. And I told her after the fact, I was like, because she is somewhat closer to a Christian perspective. I was like, do not go back and see that person. I was like, listen, I know we don't see eye to eye with this stuff. I was like, do not ever go back and see that person. And I was like, the best way I can explain it to you is just that woman, whoever that woman is, it's that medium. She got that information. Like, she knocked on some doors she shouldn't have, and that's how she got it.
Yeah.
But it was so crazy because I was like, first of all, it just clicked that the medium was telling her stuff that our person says all the time. The person has these delusions. She just started saying it to her. And it just made so much sense. I was like, oh, well, to me, it made sense because I was like, yeah, because it's the same demon that told it to him is telling it to her.
Mm-hmm.
So, anyways, forgive me for rambling on there. Forgive me for.
No, that's okay. I actually have a really crazy example too, but I don't want to talk about this person. So, but yeah, I know exactly what you mean, for sure.
Yeah. And
so, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, it's just the reaction that people, when they go deep into this, I've noticed, is the normies that dip their toes into this stuff. It like when they begin to divulge their experiences on the subject, they sound like a schizo when they do it. It initiates, maybe it doesn't initiate something, but it coaxes this reaction out of them that is very similar to a schizophrenic person, I've noticed.
Like an excitability kind of thing?
Yes, they get excited about whatever the subject is, and they make these logical jumps that really it don't make any logical sense. You know? They make they make these connections that aren't there. And it's, and then the further you dig into it, the more you realize, like, oh, they're getting these connections because they went to a tarot reader, they went to a medium, they went to this, that, or the other thing, and then it's
they opened it up for themselves.
They opened up the door of perception, and now their mind is going all over the place because they're like, oh, I can see things from a deeper perspective. And sometimes I just want to shake them and be like, no, you can't.
You're like actually way off, dude. I know.
You kind of need to get back on track, buddy.
Yeah, definitely. Well, let's see what Father Seraphim Rose has to say about these delusions that people are under about the UFOs. This is a really awesome book. I'm sure a lot of people are familiar or have read it. Orthodoxy and the Religion of the Future. He goes into all kinds of stuff, but he does have one chapter dedicated to UFOs. And he often quotes this guy, Jacques Vallée. I've never read these books. I don't think I need to because he, Father Seraphim just, I guess he has some, like, he's right about a lot of things, but obviously he's also wrong about a lot of things. So we're going to see, I guess, a little bit here. Father Seraphim, he kind of starts by saying that investigations have come to no positive result in identifying the objects as physical reality, and that new hypotheses that spring up, I guess, bring one to the edge of reality, to the boundaries of psychic and spiritual reality, which these investigators are not equipped to handle. The one thing that has persuaded a number of scientists in recent years to take the phenomena seriously is not the physical proof of them, but the fact that many serious and reliable people have seen something which cannot be explained and which often has a powerful effect on them, and usually, obviously, like a very negative effect.
It's like a PTSD inducing sort of effect, essentially,
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so Father Seraphim says, why indeed are so many UFO landings precisely in the middle of the roads? Why do such fantastically advanced craft often need repairs? Why do the occupants so often need to pick up rocks and sticks over and over again for 25 years and to test so many people? If they are actually reconnaissance vehicles from another planet, as the humanoids usually claim, Dr. Vallée well asks whether the visitors from outer space idea might not serve precisely a diversionary role in masking the real, infinitely more complex nature of the technology that gives rise to the sightings. He believes we are not dealing with successive waves of visitations from space. We are dealing with a control system. What takes place through close encounters with UFOs is control of human beliefs. And that's it. With every new wave of UFOs, the social impact becomes greater. More young people become fascinated with space, with psychic phenomena, with new frontiers in consciousness. More books and articles appear, changing our culture. And you have like constant programming of, ancient aliens and stuff on TV.
Prometheus and these other movies and the multiverse now, and it's like, look at the whole specter of the Marvel franchise was basically based on this essential framework, of there's a multiverse and there's all these different species that come out through the multiverse.
Right. Yeah. In another book, he notes that it is possible to make large sections of any population believe in the existence of supernatural races, in the possibility of flying machines, in the plurality of inhabited worlds, by exposing them to a few carefully engineered scenes, the details of which are adapted to the culture and superstitions of a particular time and place. So I guess that explains why, because we have such like science fiction minded people, and so that's why these UFOs are starting to look like some crazy technology now.
Exactly. Earlier in that section, Father Seraphim was talking about the early science fiction writers like H.G. Wells and Jules Verne, and sort of just the scope of the project of science fiction on the whole. And the thing that he noted, I thought was particularly, it stood out to me, was that really what they're doing is that, they're making it indistinguishable. Like they're making pagan myths indistinguishable from modern science and the modern scientific myth. Basically, it's a unification of the evolutionary story, of the evolutionary myth, with that of the old pagan myths, and all these things they're just sort of modern denizens of the pagan myth. And the thing is too, even if you look at the story of evolution, what the quote unquote story of evolution is, it's the same thing as the Greek pantheon, where there was a bolt of lightning that hit a primordial stoop, and then that's what caused DNA to form, and then that's what caused single cell organisms to form, and then it goes up the chain from there. And it's the same thing with the Greek pantheon. Zeus sent lightning down into water, and then man rose out of it. So this is just giving a face, a sort of a pagan overlay to, well, it already had a pagan overlay, I suppose, but it's giving another face to evolution, and it's given rise to, I mean, this whole idea is the basis of the belief of the Promethean belief.
Yeah.
I mean that like the movie Prometheus, not the Greek myth of Prometheus, but the movie of Prometheus.
Yeah.
So because that is essentially, I think that's probably standard belief for a lot of people that are materialist. For anyone who still hold on to it, I think that's probably what a lot of them believe, is that if they don't necessarily believe in evolution proper, they probably believe in something approximating a Prometheus story, where like these big, strange, albino guys came down and caused black goo to make DNA in the water, and then I'll just went from there.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like the new mythology, I guess, right?
Exactly. It's the creation of the new mythos. It's the creation of the new mythos. It's the creation of the new gods that are being put forward as quote unquote replacements of the old gods. Nietzsche said that we have to become gods ourselves in order to justify the act of killing God. When he was talking about the death of God, and these mythoses are just there to justify, the worship of the soul and the worship of the self, the movement of the eye of the soul away from God and movement towards the self, which is the whole purpose of the whole technological output, the whole project of the Enlightenment is this, the worship of the self and the movement of the eye of the soul towards the self and away from God, essentially. And this is just the metaphysical overlay that's put over it. This is the justification for it in some sense.
That's so interesting. I've never thought of it that way.
And also, I do have to just say one thing too. Also, I just had to give a shout out because, first of all, the first abduction story was in New Hampshire, so I just want to say that. Shout out to the state I live in. The first abduction story was in New Hampshire, and the oldest.
Good for you guys.
Yes, exactly. Woo, we're number one, and and the oldest alleged photograph of a UFO was in New Hampshire, also from like 1871. So, woo, we're number one. There you
go. Awesome. Yeah. Wow, that's so interesting, though. I've never thought of it that way. Like, the mythos has to like evolve because we're so like technologically minded now.
Yes, and it's doing it in a way where people don't, because that's the thing, is that people don't, people think that the X-Files or a show like that is just a show, but really what it is it's giving a script. It's giving some sort of an overlay for this new belief, essentially. And obviously, I'm not saying that the X-Files is like, that's the literal truth of the matter, but rather, just to say that it's how people are perceiving this, and it's giving people something to sort of map onto, something to code, to use Jason Miranchuk's language. It's giving people something to code as, this is the new belief. This is the belief of the time. This is the belief of the age, basically, And thank God people are coming into the church and that this is being broken to some extent, because if it's not, then this is a strong basis of the religion of the Antichrist if it continues on.
Absolutely. And that's exactly where Father Seraphim goes with this whole thing, Well, let's keep reading, I guess. An important clue to the meaning of these engineered scenes may be seen in an observation often made by careful observers of UFO phenomena, especially close encounters of the third kind and contactee cases, that they are profoundly absurd, and I kind of mentioned this last time, or contain at least as much absurdity as rationality. Individual close encounters have absurd details, like the 4 pancakes given by a UFO occupant to a Wisconsin chicken farmer in 1961. More significantly, the encounters themselves are strangely pointless, without clear purpose or meaning. A Pennsylvania psychiatrist has suggested that the absurdity present in almost all UFO close encounters is actually a hypnotic technique. When the person is disturbed by the absurd or contradictory and their mind is searching for meaning, they are extremely open to thought transference, to receiving psychic healing, etc. Dr. Valet compares this technique to the irrational koans of Zen masters. I'm actually not really sure what that is. And notice the similarity between UFO encounters and occult initiation rituals, which open the mind to a new set of symbols. All this points to what he calls the next form of religion.
Yes. Well, the comment, I believe it's been I never really looked into Zen. I mean, when I was sort of looking into Eastern stuff, I was looking more into like Hinduism and that sort of stuff. But what if I remember correctly about the whole Zen thing, essentially what that point is making is that what the point of some of the initiation rituals and some of the initiation practices and just some of the building up practices of these Eastern faiths and these occult religions is essentially just to it's like the MK Ultra process in some sense. It's like the disassociation process. Particularly like Jung wrote about this with initiations in tribal settings, right? And sort of shamanistic religions and local tribal settings and stuff like that, is that there's always this like witch's brew that's drunk. There's this sort of not always, but it's very common to see like a sort of a hallucinogenic consumption. And the reason why is because when the person goes through that, whatever that internal journey, to come out on the other side is like quote unquote the man or the shaman or the medicine man or whatever the case is. It's so
like Carl Jung.
Exactly.
And his magic potions.
Exactly. Yeah. The reason for that is because it breaks the mind. And so what the person essentially, literally, you are going through like not a metaphysical transformation, but you are going through like a deep psychological transformation when it happens. The problem is, though, is that you're doing it by, external means and drug means. And the perception is that, oh, you're waking up your true self. You're doing this, blah, blah, blah. Really what you're doing is you're inducing some sort of psychosis, and you're not becoming a new man. You're becoming like a fractured person. And that's why these MK people, it's like there's these stories about how it's like, oh, they have these dissociative identities. They have, they have borderline personality. They have this, they have that, they have whatever. And that's why, because the perception is that you are, you're not deranged. Well, that's the reality. The reality is you're deranged. The perception is that you're this, now you're like some quote unquote woke person, but really you're just deranged. Now, deranged people are very good at like doing crazy things. And that's part of the reason why they do that, is because they need someone to do the crazy stuff for the tribe, or they need someone to do crazy things in society. That's why the CIA or whoever used that stuff for these purposes, because they need people to do crazy stuff. But you're not. And so, anyways, to bring it back to the initial point, those symbols, right? The whole point of the initiation process is to shatter the person. And that's essentially what we're viewing with this stuff. It's the shattering of the mind. And that's why hypnosis is the thing that brings it out of the person, because it's like you're coaxing it out of them. And I'm almost curious as to whether or not the hypnosis is the thing that brings about these in the first place. If these are actual physical encounters, or if it's some sort of like anxiety set in, and then the hypnosis is the thing that brought it out of the person in the first place. Because you can't
induce these things.
Huh?
I think it's a range of different factors.
100%. Well, and Dyer, at some point, Dyer talked about this, and he brought up a very good point also. Some of these encounters are also just like, these people were drugged. And I think that's clear that like that some of these are like, these people were probably abducted, or someone came into their house in the night and like with like weird costumes on, and gave them like a massive dose of LSD, and then like did a couple things to them, and then they left. But like, if you didn't know that happened to you, and then you woke up in the middle of the night and you were all of a sudden like had a whole sheet of acid in your system, or the equivalent of it, and then you saw some dude in like a weird kind of face mask, you'd be freaked out by that.
Oh yeah, of course.
You'd probably think it was an alien or something. You'd be like, oh, the UFOs came down and saw me. But really, it was, I don't know, it was some dude from a 3-letter agency doing it. So
Yeah.
and so
So
anyway, that's the only point I was trying to make. It's just like that's the mechanism by which the shattering happens. That shattering is the process by which by which a person is. That's the mechanism how it plays out, how it's the introduction of the new symbols and how it's the forming of the new man. And again, it goes back to the wider point of this is how the plant, this is how the seeds are planted for the vision of the new religion, basically.
right. Yeah. So you think it's a mixture of demonic activity and like the government is fucking with people to spread this message about UFOs? Because
Yeah,
actually, Father
100%.
Seraphim does talk about that.
Yeah, 100%. Father Spyridon and Bailey mentioned the same thing. The both of them mentioned that at certain points, and there's definitely a little bit of both going on, but there's also like it's not one or the other. It's both.
Right.
I don't
Yeah.
know if they're in cahoots with each other about this. I doubt it.
Well,
I think
I think the government knows that there is definitely a demonic thing going
well,
on. Because in
some
this
people in
next thing, he does give an example. Go ahead.
right. No, I was just gonna say some people in the government definitely do.
Yeah.
I don't know how widespread it is, but yeah, some people definitely do.
Well, let me read this real quick. One investigator, Brad Steger, an Iowa College professor who has written several books on the subject, after a recent detailed study of the Air Force Blue Book files, concluded, we are dealing with a multidimensional paraphysical phenomenon, which is largely indigenous to planet Earth. Doctors Hynek and Vallée have advanced the hypothesis of Earthbound aliens to account for UFO phenomena and speculate on interlocking universes right here on Earth from which they might come, much as poltergeists produce physical effects while remaining themselves invisible. John Keel, who began his UFO investigation as a skeptic and is himself an agnostic in religion, writes, the real UFO story is one of ghosts and phantoms and strange mental aberrations of an invisible world which surrounds us and occasionally engulfs us. It is a world of illusion, where reality itself is distorted by strange forces which can seemingly manipulate space, time, and physical matter, forces which are almost entirely beyond our powers of comprehension. The UFO manifestations seem to be, by and large, merely minor variations of the age-old demonological phenomenon. In a recent bibliography of UFO phenomena prepared by the Library of Congress for the United States Air Force Office of Scientific Research, the introduction states that many of the UFO reports now being published in the popular press recount alleged incidents that are strikingly similar to demonic possession and psychic phenomena, which have long been known to theologians and parapsychologists. I don't know. It seems like an admission to me, but
I mean, yes, it definitely is. It definitely is. I mean, I mean, yeah, it definitely is. I mean, yeah. Like I
yeah,
said, there's definitely people that know. It's a question of to what extent it's
yeah,
known. That there's definitely people that there has to be people that
yeah.
know. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
There has to be. There's some, and for the question also is the people that know, do they know in like the sense of like they're trying to keep bad things from happening with this or not? And that's way above my pay grade. I don't know how
Yeah,
many foxes and molders there are actually in in these
yeah,
three-letter agencies. I don't know how many
yeah,
Dale Coopers there are out there,
yeah. So I guess I haven't looked into like UFO cults very much, but these are people who pray for contact, right?
Yeah, I mean, I know a thing or two about them, to be honest with you. Like there was a
Oh,
couple.
really?
Well, it's like there's a couple points in time where like, okay, look, there's a few points in time where it's like I was like very interested in this, especially like right before I became like, it's like literally right before I found out about Orthodoxy. I kind of like really went off the deep end with some of this stuff, and like right in the summer of 2020, it's like I went. Listen, I think a lot of the people in the audience can relate to this. How it's like, you know, if when your moment happens, when all of a sudden you start to kind of put two and two together, you go down every rabbit hole imaginable. And that was basically me, like the summer of 2020. And so, I mean, I by no means that I try to make contact or anything like that, but it's like, I looked into it. And
Oh.
is this a thing where is this about to talk about Dr. Stephen Greer and like those types of people?
Not yet.
Yeah. No. So I've looked into people like that before,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
they've those people are out there. I've met some of them, and again, it's this result is like what I was talking about earlier. It's just it induces a psychosis in you. You know, it
yeah,
induces a sort of strange psychosis when you really start to dig deep into that stuff, and in the way of like, oh, I'm I'm making contact. I'm finding out who they are. I'm gonna figure it
yeah,
out. I'm gonna
yeah,
be,
yeah.
I'm gonna be the one, man. I'm gonna blow the hole on the truth, man. I'm gonna let
Mhm.
everybody know what the real truth is, man. Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, here's a an exact example that Father Seraphim gives right here. He says case histories of people who have been drawn into contact with UFOs reveal the standard characteristics which go with involvement with demons in the occult realm. A police officer in Southern California, for example, began to see UFOs in June 1966 and thereafter saw them frequently, almost always at night. After one landing, he and his wife saw distinct traces of the UFO on the ground. During these weeks of tantalizing sightings, I became totally obsessed with the UFOs, convinced that something great was about to happen. I abandoned my daily Bible reading and turned my back on God as I began reading every UFO book I could lay my hands on. Many nights I watched in vain, trying to mentally communicate with what I then thought were extraterrestrial beings, almost praying to them to appear and establish some sort of contact with me. Finally, he had a close encounter with a craft, some 80 feet in diameter, with rotating white, red, and green lights. It sped off and left him still expecting something great to happen. But nothing ever did happen. The UFOs ceased appearing, and in his frustration, he turned to alcohol, depression, and thoughts of suicide until his conversion to Christ ended this period of his life. People who have actually contacted the UFO beings have much worse experiences. The beings sometimes literally possess them and try to kill them when they resist. Such cases effectively remind us that, quite apart from the meaning of the UFO phenomena as a whole, each UFO close encounter has a specific purpose of deceiving the individual who is contacted and leading him, if not to further contacts and spreading of the UFO message, then at least to personal spiritual confusion and disorientation. So it sounds like they're really messing with him there.
100%. And that's the goal. That's the whole purpose of the goal. The goal of that, that deception. The deception is to bring about spiritual confusion because it is naturally, because you can, of course, you can find little bits of, yeah, you can see a shooting star. You can see this, you can see that. Yeah. If you think about it, and maybe once in a while, like you'll see something and then that thought will pop in your head. It's like, oh, that was that, and then you're waiting and you're waiting and you're waiting for the next one, and then it never shows up, and you're waiting. You're like, well, when's it going to happen again? And it's never going to happen. It's like you become waiting for Godot, basically, for this
Yeah.
thing to show up or to see this new thing or to become this new thing. And that's why, the fathers almost always warn us,
Yeah.
exclusively warn us that, seeking for a spiritual experience is the last thing. In fact, it's antithetical to being a Christian, is to seek a spiritual experience. We don't look up when we pray. We have to bow our heads.
Yeah.
Uh, that's why it says in the liturgy, it says lift up our hearts to the Lord, right? But lifting up your heart does not mean lifting up your head also, because throughout Vesper service of the vigil, right? What do we say? Bow your heads unto the Lord. Because that's what we're supposed to do. What do the 4 and 20 elders do in Revelation? They cast their crowns down upon the ground and they fall on their face to the Lord. They fall down to the
Yeah.
ground. That is the proper orientation, to be towards God. Even when you're in heaven, it is to bow your head to the ground. Right. So even the look upward is a complete inversion of what we're supposed to be doing, worshiping the Lord,
Right.
So it goes against, in some sense, it goes against even the proper orientation of our actual physical bodies to be doing this, you know? And so it's no
Absolutely.
surprise that the man then became, you know, an alcohol, and, you know, glory to
Yeah,
God, glory, glory to God that the man, you know, converted to Christ, that he found peace in his heart and peace in his soul, you know, because these things will promise you those things, but they can never give that to you. It's only Christ can give that to
only
you,
Christ. Yeah, only
you
Christ
know?
can fulfill you. Yeah.
Exactly. So,
Yeah.
so thank God that guy's all right, or he turned out all right, I should say, you know?
Yeah. The most puzzling aspect of UFO phenomena to most researchers, namely the strange mingling of physical and psychic characteristics in them, is no puzzle at all to readers of Orthodox spiritual books, especially the lives of the saints. Demons also have physical bodies, although the matter in them is of such subtlety that it cannot be perceived by men unless their spiritual doors of perception are open, whether with God's will or against it. So,
Yep.
just reiterating that, but in this book instead. Orthodox literature has many examples of demonic manifestations with which fit precisely the UFO pattern, apparitions of solid beings and objects, whether demons themselves or their illusionary creations, which suddenly materialize and dematerialize, always with the aim of awing and confusing people and ultimately leading them to perdition. The lives of the 4th century St. Anthony the Great and the 3rd century Saint Cyprian, the former sorcerer, are filled with such incidents. He also gives an example from the life of Saint Martin of Tours with Anatolius, and anyone can go read those accounts from the lives of the saints.
Yes, there's also a very good one that he mentions after of Saint Neil, or Saint Nihilus, from Russia, who I think
Oh
was the,
yeah.
I don't remember what monastery he found. He founded one of the big monasteries in one of the big men. He founded like he was the beginning of the skeet communities in Russia. But yeah, I mean, like in that recounting, a demon actually physically took the person, and like
Yeah.
they flew away with them basically, and they had to pray to Saint. This is after Saint Nilus had reposed, and Saint Nilus showed up and basically like halted the demons in their tracks. But even then, still, one of the monks had to go to the person that had been stolen and had to actually physically bring them back, because he did physically move. Like they didn't just. It wasn't an illusion. They actually
Wow.
were able to physically. So they can physically. I mean, that's the thing. Is like, even though they're not. This is one of the things that. So I
Yeah.
mean, they do. Father Turbo has talked about this, about how the fact that, like, there is like an actual substance to the spiritual bodies, like whether they be angels or demons, like they do actually have a physical substance, but it's not like us. It's not physical in the way that we are physical. It's physical in the way that, like, lightning is a physical thing, but you
Yeah.
you still can't touch lightning. And plasma, like fire, is physical, but it's not something you can touch. Even if it was cool, you couldn't touch it. You can't hold it and grab it. You can't even contain it the way that you can contain water. And it can't
Yeah.
even be put into a container the way you can put air into a container either. So
Right.
it's the same thing with them. And Saint Ignatius Branchianov, I always butcher his last name. I'm not sure if that's how you
Yeah.
pronounce his name, but yeah,
Brian
Saint
Canada.
Ignati. That's in Russian. It's Ignati. So Saint Ignati, we talked about that also. He actually had a series of debates about that with Saint Theophan the Recluse, because they disagreed about what the
Oh.
substance of those things are. The point is, though, is that it's known amongst the fathers that, like, they have a physical capability where they can actually. That's part. I mean, because think about it too. We were talking about that earlier with sleep paralysis, right?
Yeah.
How else are they able to actually make it seem like there's pressure on your chest and hold you down, unless they can actually physically manipulate you?
Yeah.
Um, so they can do that stuff. It's not out of the realm of possibility at all.
Yeah.
Because this whole
Absolutely.
notion about how it's interdimensional, it's this and the other thing. Well, it is, but that doesn't mean that they can't. It is and it isn't. It's not. They don't exist on this plane the way that we do, but they still have access to this plane, and they still do
Yeah.
exist on this plane, but just not in the sense that we do. It's still a different thing. So I don't know how to describe it. I'm not
No,
a
you're
demonologist,
you're
but
explaining it well. I mean, as well as you can. Yeah, these
yeah,
things are still mysterious, but
exactly.
apparently. happen, you know?
If we were
So,
supposed to understand how all this stuff works, God would have made it so. But there's a part of the reason
yeah,
why we can't see these things, like we were saying earlier. So, but anyways,
yeah,
yeah, they can. Don't be tricked don't be tricked into thinking that they can't do anything. No, they still can. It's all of them still can. So that's the thing.
absolutely.
So it shouldn't shock anyone that
Yeah,
these
yeah,
people are being physically moved, they're being physically abducted. It shouldn't shock you because it's
right.
within the realm of possibility with these beings, with these demons. So
Yep, absolutely. So, Father Seraphim gets into the meaning of UFOs. This is kind of the apocalyptic entailment, I guess. First, UFO phenomena are but one part of an astonishing outpouring of paranormal events, what just a few years ago most people would have considered miracles. In the Christian apocalyptic view, we can see that the power which until now has restrained the final and most terrible manifestation of demonic activity on earth has been taken away. That's really crazy. Orthodox Christian government and public order, whose chief representative on earth was the Orthodox Emperor, and the Orthodox Christian worldview no longer exist as a whole, and Satan has been loosed out of his prison, where he was kept by the grace of the Church of Christ. He was loosed in order to deceive the nations and prepare them to worship Antichrist at the end of the age. Perhaps never since the beginning of the Christian era have demons appeared so openly and extensively as today. The visitors from outer space theory is but one of the many pretexts they are using to gain acceptance for the idea that higher beings are now to take charge of the destiny of mankind. Second, UFOs are but the newest of the mediumistic techniques by which the devil gains initiates into his occult realm. They are a terrible sign that man has become susceptible to demonic influence as never before in the Christian era. In the 19th century, it was usually necessary to seek out dark seance rooms in order to enter into contact with demons, but now only need look into the sky, usually at night, it is true. Mankind has lost what remained of basic Christian understanding up to now, and now passively places itself at the disposal of whatever powers may descend from the sky. And third, any thoughts on that?
no. I was just humming, just being like, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And thirdly, the message of the UFOs is prepare for Antichrist. The savior of the apostate world is coming to rule it. Perhaps he himself will come in the air in order to complete his impersonation of Christ. Perhaps only the visitors from outer space, quote unquote, will land publicly in order to offer cosmic worship of their master. Perhaps the fire from heaven will be only a part of the great demonic spectacles of the last times. At any rate, the message for contemporary mankind is expect deliverance, not from the Christian revelation and faith in an unseen God, but from vehicles in the sky. And you mentioned Bishop Ignatius Brian Kononov in his book on miracles and signs. I need to read that. Remarked on the striving to be encountered in contemporary Christian society to see miracles and even perform miracles. Such striving reveals the self-deception founded on self-esteem and vainglory that dwells in the soul and possesses it. So the reason why people need to see signs and miracles in the sky, it comes from their own vainglory, which is
Absolutely.
it's really
Just like the
interesting.
just like the Israelites on Mount Sinai, they needed that golden calf, right?
Yeah,
Right?
yeah,
Just like the northern tribes that fell away, they needed something immediately. So they turned away from the living God and they turned towards their idols that gave
yeah,
them some sort
yeah,
of thing, whatever it was. And just in the same way that other people turned away from just many of the Eastern European, right, whether it be the Russians, and obviously many people were faithful unto death, but there were many that walked away because they wanted an immediate thing, and many of
right.
them left the faith permanently during the revolution because they wanted to be with this thing of the moment, instead of sticking it out with Christ. um,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
you know so It's the universal temptation in some sense. It's the universe. It's one of the oldest temptations that there is to go along with this. This is just the new form of it. And the great fear, I suppose, is that might be approaching the final form, I suppose. And I think that's the subtext of which Father Seraphim is putting forward here, is that we're entering into the final form. And whether that's the case or not, only time will tell, right? The Apostle John, in his epistle, right, he said that we are in the end times. He said that 2,000 years ago.
Yeah.
And that there are many antichrists that are coming, and there's one final one to come. So we don't know. No man knoweth the hour.
Right.
All this is a ramping up, though, and it's
evident
this is a ramping up.
Yeah. Most definitely.
But the only caveat I would say to that, as opposed to the only caveat I would say about that, with that particular thing that he wrote, is that he wrote that at a time when he wrote that in the mid-'70s, and the world is not the same as it is back then. Evil in many ways is more evident now than it was then, and this temptation is definitely flaunting people more in the face now than it was then in many ways. But at the same time, it's like, for all of its problems, like Russia's being revived. There's issues there still, just how there's issues in all the other Eastern Bloc countries. But these cultures that were Orthodox at one point in time are being revived as Orthodox now, whether it be Serbia, Russia, other places. The church is being transplanted into America. We are part of that process now. Now what the fruit of that will be in the future, I don't know, but we can't necessarily say what the final outcome of all this stuff is going to be yet. But we have to have hope that there's something fighting against this. The great restrainer, who is the emperor, is no longer with us, and may the prayers of him and of all the rest of the royal family be with us in these times. But something else is being offered. What that is, I don't know, but we're a part of it, because we're part of this growing of the church in America. We're part of the growing of the church in a land that it never was before. And maybe that will be the restraint. I don't know. I couldn't tell you. I don't know. But God is merciful, and he has intervened in history before. He may do it again. That's the whole point of Constantine. That was an intervention in history, by Christ.
Interesting. Yeah. That's not supposed to be the norm, right?
No, it's not supposed to be the norm. And it's not something we should necessarily expect either, I guess. So don't wait for the miracle to happen, I suppose, I guess. But if we keep repenting, even if the end does come, we'll be all right. We just have to keep moving towards Christ,
Yes.
Keep moving towards Christ. Always.
Good point, John, as usual.
I heard it from someone on the internet somewhere. It's not my point. I heard it from Father Seraphim.
Well, here's a secular warning, because we really need that. Even the secular investigators of UFO phenomena have seen fit to warn people against their dangers. John Keel, for example, writes, dabbling with UFOs can be as dangerous as dabbling with black magic. The phenomenon preys upon the neurotic, the gullible, and the immature. Paranoid schizophrenia, demonomania, and even suicide can result, and has resulted in a number of cases. A mild curiosity about UFOs can turn into a destructive obsession. For this reason, I strongly recommend that parents forbid their children from becoming involved. School teachers and other adults should not encourage teenagers to take an interest in this subject. So that's kind of interesting from this guy to say all that.
Yeah. Well, because, a lot of these people, it's like that's how a lot of people have become, listen, a lot of people, there is definitely a pipeline of like investigating these weird things and then becoming religious. I mean, they don't always become Orthodox, but they'll become like, you know, Protestants or something like that, because it's like you see these weird things and then all of a sudden it's like you're like, well, that means something has to be out there. And if there's something, clearly there's something evil out there. If there's something evil out there, then there must be something good. It's definitely happened with people before.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And
even if you don't necessarily end up believing that, it's like, it's if you read the stories of those people, you see what it's happened to them. It's like it's clear and obvious. Like you don't want that to. I don't want that to be my kids. You know, if I had kids, I wouldn't want them to be looking into this stuff. Even if I
No,
was an atheist, you know, even if I was still, you know, into whatever, like whatever I was into before I was a Christian, it's like I wouldn't, you know, I would be like, yeah, you guys probably shouldn't be looking into all this stuff, you know.
yeah, 100%. So, with the UFO deception, do you have any thoughts on this? I mean, I feel like Father Spyridon Bailey, he obviously has to use some crossover information from what Seraphim used in his book, but he does have like a very different like approach to it, and he really BTFOs people like C.G. Young and Stephen Greer and
Yeah, and
others.
well, and that's the other thing too is that I think because he's writing it like 30 years, or no, like at this point it's almost 40 years
Yeah,
after, you know, Orthodoxy and Religion of the Future came out. So, like, you know, you know, Dr. Stephen Greer, you know, was not even on the scene when Father Seraphim was around. But I can guarantee you that if he was, Father Seraphim would have probably had a whole chapter just about that guy. You know, and so, but I thought that I definitely thought that him, you know, making the connection to Jung, and Father Seraphim also makes a connection to Carl Jung in that, but I thought that was particularly, you know, some of his you know, just bringing up that like a lot of the stuff starts with Jung, I thought was very interesting because, you know, as I mentioned in the last, I didn't really go into it too much, I guess, in the last episode, but like, you know, I've read Jung like
yeah,
extensively, and like, you know, all of my, you know, if I didn't find Orthodoxy, I would be some sort of like Gnostic Jungian right now, because that's basically what I was before, you know, before I became a Christian, before I became Orthodox. That's what I was, and it's 100% factual that, you know, Jung is the intellectual gateway for a lot of this stuff. He's the intellectual gateway for a lot of things, and this is one of them. And he is the first person that I know of, and I think he wrote about it either right before like Roswell and all the other like kind of explosion of the UFO sort of interest by the public, either right before or right after. And so his thoughts on it are interesting, and his take is obviously extremely Gnostic, and it's wrong, but it's Jung in general is a part of this new movement that's, you know, the worship of the self. You know, he's very much the he's very much the one of the in my opinion, one of the figureheads of this worship of the self, and this movement towards the self, that is part of the, you know, religion of Antichrist, as it were, and the
yeah,
or you could also say the spirit of the age that we're in. You
right.
know, the general movement of the age that we're in right now. You know,
Interesting. Yeah, I'm glad I didn't get too deep into him.
I mean, he has some interesting ideas. He's helpfully wrong about some things, but yeah, he's like, it's, if anybody out there is like knows anything about him, or it's like is especially if you're a Christian, if you're considering reading him, it's like you can, but just be aware that like everything that just I wouldn't do it unless you're confident that you can, like, you know, not take any of the ideas back with you, because it gets in you deep, you know.
Yeah, be careful with that even, you know.
Yeah, yeah. Tread lightly with his writings. Tread extremely
Right.
lightly. Yeah.
Yeah, sounds like it. Well, I'll just kind of read a little bit at the end of the book. He says, demons take on many forms, but the purpose of their transformation is not to protect us, but in order that they may deceive us and perform signs and miracles through the power of the prince of the air. Blessed Augustine tells us that the nature of demons is such that through the sense perception belonging to the aerial body, they readily surpass the perception possessed by earthly bodies, and in speed too, because of the superior mobility of the aerial body. They incomparably excel not only the movements of men and of beasts, but even the flight of birds. Today, we might add to Blessed Augustine's comments that they exceed in capabilities of fighter jets. And Father Spyridon gives like an example of that at the beginning of the book. Today we might add to the ability to transform themselves is also confirmed in St. Paul's second letter to the Corinthians, when he says Satan is transformed into an angel of light and his ministers as the servants of righteousness.
Right.
And
Did you ever read into, so did you ever, have you ever read into like Skinwalker Ranch or like any of those like other like paranormal, like, or like X-Files, like cases where it's like they always pop up as like orbs of light? You know what I mean? Yeah, and it's like, you know, it's just like what St. Paul said. It's like, you know, they turn themselves into angels of light, and they can just turn into a ball of light probably too. You know, and the strange, I remember I used to watch stuff about Skinwalker Ranch all the time, and you know, bulbs of light were very common there. And one of the things that would happen is that there were these very particular like bully orbs of light that would show up, and then they'd be like they would essentially you know, induce like a feeling of terror in the person just by their presence. Even dogs would terror at them. And so yeah, it's very common. That's a very extremely, you know, common sighting with like these things.
Orbs.
Yeah, these orbs of light. They're literally just balls of light. Yeah.
Yeah. Saint Athanasius warned that the devil, the enemy of our race, having fallen from heaven, wanders about our lower atmosphere, and there bearing rule over his fellow spirits. In the same work, St. Athanasius describes their activity in the lower atmosphere. He says they work illusions, and that Christ came to clear the air and prepare the way for us up to him. Christ's death on the cross was in the very air where the demons are present. He was lifted up to confront and abolish the fruit of their work, which is death. St. Athanasius writes, our Lord Jesus Christ, who took upon him to die for all, stretched forth his hands, not somewhere on the earth beneath, but in the air itself, destroying the devil who was working in the air. And like I mentioned last time, he gives like tons more patristic quotes about the nature of the aerial demons. So, yeah. That's pretty much, I mean, I think we pretty much got it.
It's a pretty, we could probably go for another 3 or 4 hours if we really wanted to about this whole thing, but I think we kind of, we've kind of put a nice summation out there about it, you know. And the last thing, last thing about it, it's like, you know, this is the whole point of the toll houses also. I mean, the whole other subject in and of itself, but it's just like, you go through the air. You have to go on the ascend up. You have to go through the air, which is part of the reason why when we are baptized, we receive a guardian angel, because our guardian angel is going to be like, you know, that's why there's always prayers. You know, I don't know if people realize that that's part of the reason why you pray to your guardian angel, is because, you know, when you die, you're going to realize how good of a friend he really is to you, you know, and how much you actually need that guy, because, you know, he's kind of going to, well, I mean, they help us all the time, right? Doesn't matter what we're doing. They're always helping us, but especially in that traversing upwards after the soul departs from the body, that's when they're really like, you know, their help to us is most evident. But yeah, you know, you know,
good point. That's a whole other thing about these.
It is a whole other thing. Yeah, it's a subject for another day. But you know, it's just like the little midget guy in Twin Peaks said, you know, we have descended from pure air, you know?
Oh, yeah.
I know it's from Firewalk with me. It's not from the series, but anyways, yeah, it's the same. It's the same. Shout out to Jethro. I know he's gonna get that reference. This is a Formica table. Anyway, so that's what he says. He's talking about a Formica. Anyways, so the point is like, yeah, that's this is there's a reason why, you know, there's a reason why you know, the people that get really into this are called schizos. And there's a reason why the schizos are talking to people. that don't seem to be there. And there's a reason why all of these other, you know, all of these other things are sort of connected, and it's
Yeah.
all the spirit of the time, and it's dark, and it's a movement away from Christ that our culture is making, and it's not
Mhm.
fun.
Yeah, it's been a long time actually that we've been making this
Yeah,
mistake.
it is, but thankfully, you know, people coming to Christ is the thing that will correct it, and
Yeah.
that's why I made that point earlier about our repentance. We have to keep doing that. We have to keep letting go of the old man, and keep
Hmm.
putting on the new man. We have to keep doing that. It's it's impossible for many of us, I think, to do it all in one foul swoop. Otherwise, we would just be, floating on, walking on water right now. And I haven't seen that from anyone yet. I don't know. Maybe there's someone out there. Who knows? But uh, we have to keep taking down the old man, and wearing the new. And that is the thing that is really going to combat this. And it's like what our friend Saint Seraphim, told us all that time ago. You acquire the spirit of peace, and thousands around you will be saved. And this is a part of it. This is the proof of protection.
Yeah.
The restrainer, which was the czar, is not coming back anytime soon. But the real restrainer is the church. The real thing that holds stuff back, the thing that keeps the sun moving, is the liturgy. You know, multiple saints have said that the reason why the earth is moving, even the sun keeps coming up, is the services of the church, is the liturgy itself. So, you know, keep going to services, keep going
Yeah.
to confession, go deeper to the extent that you can. Keep your prayer rules going. Keep the fast when the fast is going. Keep going deeper. And if we keep acquiring that spirit of peace, more and more people will be saved around us.
Amen.
Amen.
Yeah, amen. We spoke briefly about, the Orthodox survival course from um, Father Seraphim Rose. I did actually listen to it a few years ago, but I feel like I only dipped my feet into it and I never really jumped in. So it's probably about time that I do that. And you were saying that this is like a foundational work for you, right? In your
Oh yeah,
conversion.
100%. Oh yeah, 100%, Mel. 100%. It is the most important. It's the thing that, I mean, when I came into the church, it was very tumultuous, and troubling, and just difficult time in my life. And I've always been a history person, and this is the thing. Like, listening to Father Seraphim's words about this stuff is what got me through that time, and it's what helped me orient. And it's the and I when I interact with new people at church and stuff, I always recommend that work, because it's like, we have to understand where we've been in order to understand where we're going. We have to
Right.
understand the motion of history, because it's not clear, because if because how much of because I think that Father Seraphim even talks about this in the beginning of the survival course, where he's like, people talk about the church, but people who aren't actually Orthodox, they just don't get it. It's almost like it's not even doesn't actually register for most people until the conversion actually begins in your heart, and then you realize, like, wait, this was here this whole time, and I didn't even realize. I don't know. Did you ever have that reaction when you came into the church by chance?
Yeah,
This,
probably. Probably many times.
this whole church, this religion, it's so different, but it's been here this whole time. And how did I
Yeah.
not know, how did I not know about this?
Right. Yeah.
Right? How did I not know about this? Well, part of the reason is because it's like, our dial, going back to this whole radio analogy, right? Our dial, the church is on a very particular it's on a very particular setting of the radio. It's a very particular radio wave. You could argue in some sense theosis is just having your radio set to God's station all the time, you know? And that's the range in which the station has to be at to pick up orthodoxy. The West has basically taken our acceptable range and moved it all the way to the other side of it, you know? And so that's why, you know, for a long time, it's like there were churches, but people had no clue what to even make of it. There's a really good channel, I think it's called the Tablion, and this guy was talking about this saint from the like the late 19th, early 20th century. I think his name is Saint Sebastian of he's from the West Coast. He was one of the first American-born Orthodox saints, and some reporter from like the San Francisco Chronicle or somewhere went into his church service, and it's one of the earliest, you know, American depictions of an Orthodox service. And the description that they gave was like, yeah, these barbaric men in long beards are burning incense like they're druidic priests and blah, 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 blah. Basically, they're just like, they had no concept of what they were watching. So they just thought that they were like pagans, basically, you know?
Wow.
And so the reason why I bring all this up is just to say this, is that, you know, foreign contact with the church, which is what all of us have at the onset, it's such a, especially when you start to understand what you're really looking at, it's so radically different, and it's so gosh, Mel, it's like I'm having trouble and difficulty actually describing it, because it's so radically different from everything else that we have in around us, that it's almost as if you saw a UFO, you know, you wouldn't know what to think of it. You wouldn't know what to describe it with. You probably would. I mean, for some people, it induces like a response. It's like, oh my gosh, what am I looking at? For some people, they seek after it, you know.
Yeah.
And why is it the case? Because we were one church at one point. Well, and that's the story of the apostasy. That's the falling away. That's why I tell people, look into this, watch the survival course, look into it, listen to it, because that's the story of the apostasy. That's the story of the long fall away that we've been on, that we're starting to course correct now by coming into the church, you know?
Yeah.
That's the story of it. And there's no way to understand where we've really been unless you look at it from that perspective, because none of the other history makes sense. And it never, for me at least, Mel, it never made sense. History as a whole never made more sense until I learned about, you know, what Father Seraphim wrote in the survival course. And it's just, everything has just clicked from that point forward, like it never had before.
Wow, dude. That's amazing. Well, it would be a real treat to definitely like go through it with you.
Well,
And
I mean,
I'm sure it would be a treat for everyone else too, that all the
I guess,
people who are
I
paying
don't know. What
attention.
do you guys? I don't know. Whoever's watching this, I mean, just let us know if you share the show with your friends, if you keep it up. Maybe we'll have something going in the future. You know, who knows? We'll see. We'll just have to see. I guess it depends on how you kids like it. So if you want to, let us know and we'll do it. All right.
Sounds good to me.
Beautiful.
Well, yeah. Thank you so much again, John. This was awesome. Yeah.
This is a ton of fun, Mel. I appreciate it. Always good to hang out with a friend. And I appreciate you. And glad to talk to you. And it's still Christmas time for me, so Christ is born.
Glorify him. Yeah.
By the way,
until next time.
Yes. I'll see you later, buddy. Have a good one.
All right. Bye.
Bye-bye.